Hello everyone, and welcome once again to the Temple Institute Parsha class. My name is Gedalia Meyer, and I'm podcasting from Ma'ale Adumim in Israel. It has been argued that language is the single greatest advancement in human history. There is a considerable amount of scientific and philosophical speculation to back up this claim. Among the arguments is that this tool, this remarkable ability, has enabled the human mind, as remarkable as it is on its own, to work with other minds to make the combination exponentially greater than the individuals were on their own. When two or more people can talk intelligently about something, they come up with things that neither of them would have dreamed had they simply pondered the matter on their own. Of course, this doesn't always play out that way, and it is not unusual that having someone else in the mix only clutters things up and confuses the matter. But on the whole, it has been a very efficient way of getting us out of the trees and into the 21st century. Included in its likely ultimate byproducts are religion, agriculture, tools, the wheel, writing, civilization, science, philosophy, the computer, social media, and just about everything else worth talking about. That's quite a track record for something that probably started out as an emphatic grunt. But it hasn't been all sweetness and success with language. There has probably been an equal amount of bad and good that has come from it. Wars and violence of all sorts, libels and backstabbing, and all kinds of rotten human behavior have all been the direct product of language. The amount of sheer evil that comes from people talking to each other about each other is something that would baffle an outside observer who is patiently witnessing the development of this remarkable skill. Language is a neutral power. It can be used for great good, and it can be used for the lowest evil. It's up to us. This week's Parsha is called Korach. That word is actually a name, one of the most infamous in the entire Torah. It is the name of a man who was a Levite, the tribe assigned to handling all aspects of the Tabernacle. He was thus a relative of Moshe. The Parsha begins by stating that he and a few others from another tribe took something, though it doesn't say exactly what it was they took. But it states that they were joined by another 250 men of some renown from other tribes. This group gathered together to take a stand against Moshe and Aaron, under the presumed cause that they had taken too much authority upon themselves and left everyone else as mere underlings. This all comes out of the first 3 verses of the Parsha. The rest of the chapter and the next chapter deals with the results of this confrontation. The solution to this challenge to the authority of Moshe and Aaron was met by their insisting that God would prove their side right through some method of divine determination. Things went from bad to worse from that point. Korach and his followers refused to back down, and the high noon battle was set for the next day. As things materialized, the method of determining who was right was to be by some system of lighting incense, as unlikely as this might sound. When the rules of the duel were established, God finally entered the picture. In what seems like a repeat pattern from the past, God threatens to destroy them all in an instant. Moshe and Aaron prostrated themselves in an effort to stave off this apparently disproportionate employment of divine wrath. But this time, God wasn't to be put off by any pleading on the part of Moshe. Unlike with the spies and the golden calf, God refused to back down from dealing with these troublemakers in the way that they deserved. God tells Moshe to instruct everyone to stay away from the dwellings of the leaders of the rebellion, for what was apparently going to be a definitive demonstration of God's anger. Moshe, taking his cue from this, explained to everyone that God would back him up by causing the earth to swallow up the rebel leaders right into the ground. Anything less than this definitive demonstration would prove that Moshe was wrong and the rebels were right. Putting everything on the line like this was a risky move, but as things turned out, his gamble worked. The ringleaders, including Korach, were indeed swallowed by the earth along with their unfortunate families. So ended the bad guy Korach. His 250 followers were consumed in a fire that broke out in the aftermath of this divine sinkhole. But the rebellion wasn't quite over. The next chapter goes into the general effect that this whole rebellion set into the Israelites' collective mindset. The incense pans that were to be used were set out as a sign of the failed rebellion. But the masses of people weren't satisfied. They complained to Moshe that the people of God had been killed, presumably unnecessarily. God's glory again appeared, and God threatened to destroy them all. This time, however, Moshe and Aaron were able to avert another catastrophe by offering the incense on the altar and somehow staving off what was turning out to be a divinely issued plague. When all the dust had cleared, close to 15,000 people were dead from the plague. The upshot of all this was that this was indeed a final demonstration that the rules had to be followed and there were to be no more challenges to the authority of Moshe and the priestly lineage of Aaron. Another sign of divine approval of Aaron's status was displayed in the form of his staff blossoming with almonds, while those of other tribes didn't. But still the bad blood persisted. Upon seeing this divine sign, the people thought that they were still in danger and were all going to die. They associated the entire trauma with unauthorized approaching the tabernacle. This, it turns out, was exactly what Moshe intended that they should think. It was only to be very specific people who could approach the tabernacle, and all others were to be kept away. Thus was established once and for all the unique status of the tribe of the Levites, and even more the unique status of Aaron and his sons, the priests, or Kohanim. When all is said and done with this dramatic episode of the Bible, we have to wonder what this was all about. At the end of the day, things were more or less as they were before any of this happened. The Levite tribe and the priestly subset of that tribe had been well established before any of this. Korach's whole rebellion was just a brief flare-up of a challenge to Moshe and Aaron's authority that was put down almost immediately. The loss of so many lives was an unfortunate outcome of the whole thing, but things really didn't change all that much from before to after. So why does the Torah make such a big deal out of this whole story? There's an entire parsha devoted to it, complete with the very name of the parsha memorializing the main ringleader as one of the most famous figures in the Torah. While it is true that he is remembered as a bad guy, he is nevertheless remembered. What ultimately was the real point of all of this? On the most basic level, it is simply telling the story of a particularly troubling episode at the beginning of the 40 years of wandering around the wilderness. That's really what this was. But there is something else here that is of great importance, which is probably why this story was ultimately included in the Bible. This, it turns out, is the classic case of rebellion in the Torah. More than the golden calf, more than the spies, more than any of the other mini rebellions that happened both before and after this, this was the real textbook example of rebellion. Those others were of a religious or military nature, or they were over something as basic as food or water. This one had absolutely nothing with which to justify it. It was simply a rebellion for rebellion's sake. In fact, this rebellion has been enshrined in an early rabbinic text as the epitome of a dispute, quote, not for the sake of heaven. As opposed to classic rabbinic disputes, which are recorded all over the Talmud, and which are represented in that early rabbinic text as the disputes of Hillel and Shammai, two very early rabbinic leaders, and are called, quote, disputes for the sake of heaven, this one was not. This was just looking for a way to cause problems. Korach, for all his faults, was a good speaker, a good politician. He managed to get all those guys to back him up in this impossible rebellion and managed to get them all killed along with 15,000 other people. The whole thing was foolish and arrogant and not at all thought out, but it succeeded in getting the idea out, and it just grew on its own. If anything, this illustrates the explosive power of words and of language. We talk and we write and we argue and we complain. We believe we are not really all that responsible for whatever comes out of our mouths, and certainly not for what we send out on some form of social media. Whether it was through talking or yelling or whispering or posting, whether it was in a text or on Facebook, whether a little chirp or a thing on Twitter that went around the world, we have convinced ourselves that we can say whatever we feel like and not worry a bit about the consequences. Of course, we do have the right of free speech, as long as that right lasts. But we also have to recognize that language is a double-edged sword. It allows us to communicate anything we want to almost anyone we want, but it also opens up a lot of Pandora's boxes. Korach took it upon himself to get this whole thing started. He rallied his troops and got them all killed. He didn't realize the volcano that he had caused to erupt by the power of his words. As human society ventures further and further into the uncharted territory of speech dominated by social media and its unknown spin-offs of the future, we are placing ourselves further and further at the whims of language and communication. There is no question that the tendency to insult and curse and just be plain rude has increased exponentially since the social media phenomenon took over our lives. This is because language, our greatest tool in our tremendous bag of tools, is being used in ways that we are untrained and unprepared for. We had hundreds of thousands of years to gear up to the old forms of language. We've had about 20 or so to get used to the new form. It's like giving a child a bomb to play with. Social media isn't going away anytime soon, as far as anybody knows. It looks to be here for the long haul and will only get bigger as time goes on. It is the latest and greatest manifestation of language. Will it be used for good or for evil, or some unholy mix of the two? Nobody knows, but it is everyone's responsibility, both individually and collectively, to make sure that this latest form of this great skill doesn't become the doom of human beings created in the image of God. We can get this thing in check and make it a force for good, but it will be a challenge. Are we up to this challenge? Shabbat Shalom.